Well, I see
Okay,
those comments on the.
we're good to go. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Manny Grossman, and he's been doing his own research into what's known as the Son of Sam case. And there was a recent documentary that was just put out on Netflix called Sons of Sam, plural. And Manny knows a lot more about the plural Sons of Sam than really what the police were telling people what happened back in 1975. And I've done my own inquiries. I've written an article about the Arliss Perry death because of its connection to Crowley Moss, October 12th, which was Crowley's birthday, which occultists celebrate. But I've also done some recent interviews as well. One was with Michael Benson. That was last month. His book was The Wicked King Wicker, The Son of Sam Siege Upon New York City. I also did one with Thomas Henry Horan about Son of Sam. Berkowitz did not act alone. And then me and Roberta Glass of the True Crime Report talked about the Sons of Sam documentary. So that's some background. But Manny has really original research. And people were telling me, hey, William, you got to get this guy on your show. And I didn't really know who Manny was, but I've been reading through his work on YouTube. You can go to Manny Grossman and see his videos. And he's walking around. And for me, it was an excellent job because it gave me insight that I didn't have from reading these books. So you really see kind of this creepy element of Untermeyer Park and that area of Yonkers where all this stuff happened. But he can talk more about that. So, Manny Grossman, are you there?
Yes. Thank you, William, for having me. Much appreciated.
Well,
hello to the crowd.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you agreeing to the interview. Really fascinating research. I watched 3 of your videos. I saw the entirety of the first one you did with Jason Goodman of Crowdsource the Truth. So that was fascinating. And you just put a second one up a couple days ago.
Yes.
But for people may not have heard you, maybe I think there's definitely some buzz, but if people have not heard your background, can you talk about what led you to your own personal investigation into what's known as the Son of Sam?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. And yeah, no one really knew me about 2 months ago. No one knew who I was because I was completely unknown. Never had a YouTube channel, never had a Twitter, never had any really social media. Just wasn't my thing. I was able to somehow eke out a living here in New York City without having any of that stuff for many, many years. But I'm not a newbie to the case. I go back to Son of Sam to 1993 when I was a 20-year-old college student, and I was hanging out with a friend of mine up in Yonkers, coincidentally enough. See, I live right near where all of this took place. I live in the North Bronx. I've lived here my entire life, and I still live here now. So I'm very close to all these sites. And so in 93, I was just hanging out with my friend. Didn't know anything. This was quite near Untermeyer Park up in Yonkers where he lives, literally just down the block. And we were just hanging out one day. His father was there, and they just started talking about, hey, Manny, did you know that Berkowitz was a member of a cult? They used to hang out in Untermeyer Park. They would worship the devil and sacrifice kids, and they went out and shot people. No, I had no clue, man. What are you talking about? Yeah, so they told me this story, and of course it intrigued me, but my friend's father went a little further. He told me he was a fireman. He told me that in 1977, he was called to a scene of a fire in Berkowitz's apartment building. Most likely the fires that were caused when somebody, they say it was Berkowitz, put bullets in front of Craig Glassman's door and and then lit him on fire. And in either case, he ended up in Berkowitz's apartment, my friend's father. And he told me that it was really strange because he was there about 2 or 3 days before the arrest. And Berkowitz's apartment was pristine, clean. Everything was folded. There was not a speck of dust in that entire apartment. And then, of course, 3 days later, what happens? He gets arrested, and his apartment it looks like a madman lived there. Holes punched in the wall, pornographic literature thrown all over the place, all his belongings completely gone and taken out of the apartment. So that was my first introduction to this whole notion that maybe the Son of Sam case wasn't all that it seemed. And of course, I was 20. I wasn't all that concerned, but it was something that always stuck in my mind. So what I did, William, over the subsequent years was basically everybody who I met that was from Yonkers, I just started talking to them about Son of Sam. Sort of an early, what I'm doing now is, and very influenced by Jason Goodman, this whole crowdsourcing notion of trying to get information from the viewers as well. See, I'm not an occult expert. I'm not an expert in symbology or any of this type of stuff. So the crowd can bring all this stuff in. So in the 90s, I was just asking questions and people were telling me stories. That's the thing about Son of Sam that's so intriguing. Everybody in Yonkers seemed to know about it, right? That there was this cult hanging out in Untermeyer Park and they were killing dogs in the middle of the night, sacrificing kids, doing all sorts of weird stuff. Everybody knew, everybody was talking about it. And so, of course, it really, for my mind, this was very intriguing. And so culminating in about 2003, 2004, when it started to get very heavy for me, that's when I started to meet people who were involved. People who were friends with David Berkowitz, people who were friends with John Wheaty's car, people who knew about things that they probably should not have known about in terms of the crimes. And that's, of course, when I also started getting my life threatened. People started getting, why are you asking all these questions, dude? What's going on? It was just this very weird period where I just felt like everything was converging and I was meeting all these people. And then it got a little hairy and I kind of put it on the back burner and started a new career in gardening and landscaping, which was what I was happily doing until March 2020, when, of course, the entire country shut down. Cuomo shut down my state of New York and essentially put me out of business. I was just a happy landscaper, had tons of clients in the city. I was having a great career teaching at the New York Botanical Garden. And in subsequent months, once what I call the plandemic started, that's when all my clients started firing me for not wearing a mask. I got fired from NYBG for daring to talk about Bill Gates. Cancel culture, all that stuff started happening to me. So I'm sitting here, and excuse me for speaking so long, William, but I'm just trying to bring the audience up to speed, mainly because I don't have any sort of internet presence before this video series. So I'm sitting there shell-shocked, March, April, May of 2020. My entire career, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience can relate to this. I'm just one in a million of millions of people this happened to.
Yeah, tens of millions.
Yeah, sure. Tens of millions of people this happened to. And so for the first few months, I was shell shocked. I didn't know what to do. And I turned to YouTube for, I guess, solace, just to pass the time. And I started watching certain YouTubers, two in particular. The Dollar Vigilante, Jeff Berwick, who I like very much, and also Jason Goodman from Crowdsource the Truth. And both of these guys were doing what was called the walk and talk. And basically just walking around town and talking into the camera, off the cuff, extemporaneously, free association, stream of consciousness. And I found it to be a very powerful medium. So I, after many, many months, one morning, I just literally decided, okay, I had this artistic itch. Son of Sam has always been in my mind. I live so close. I'm going to go out and do a walk and talk on Son of Sam. So that led to the first video, which actually that first video, if I could, I'd get rid of it if I could, mainly because when I first started this project, William, I was just planning on telling the story of the ultimate evil. I wasn't involved in the investigation. I wasn't involved with investigators. So my knowledge was basically just like an average internet researcher's knowledge, with a little bit more thrown in because I had met people who were involved and who had told me stories. But still, I was telling the story of the ultimate evil. After that first video came out, it started garnering a lot of attention. I had no idea that Josh Zeman was making his excellent documentary that was going to come out just a couple weeks out later. That came out May 5th. My first video came out in mid-April, or maybe even late March. I'm not sure. I don't remember at this point.
I think it says March 17th right there.
Yeah,
the
March
first
17th.
One was Yonkers Untermeyer Park Aqueduct.
Right. I just did it, and I had no plans to do another one, and I didn't even know Josh Zeman was making his documentary. Nothing like that. It was just something that I wanted to do to basically scratch an artistic itch. And so Well, once I did it, though, I started getting some attention, which I couldn't believe. I figured 10 people would watch the video and that would be that. But what happened was the comment section started blowing up. And I started getting comments from people who were involved with Maury Terry's investigation, people who were involved with Carl Denaro. I don't know if you know Carl Denaro. He's a Son of Sam victim.
Well, I was on one of the long-term investigations was the Ultimate Evil group on Facebook. So I was on there with Denaro before Maury Terry died. So probably 2012, 2013. I was on there with Ed Ackerman, but there was a lot of information being exchanged. And there was always rumors that Terry was somebody, at least a front person or himself, was kind of ghost watching all of the exchanges taking place there.
Yeah, that was the rep. There was he had a handle called Trudy Leak that he used as
that was him then. See, I never had that confirmed, but I remember that person was posting very frequently. So that was Terry. So people were engaged in talking to Terry, and that was Denaro. So a lot of people were on there, a lot of researchers too. I think that Dave McGowan was on there. So a lot of kind of some known figures. Yeah.
Wow, I read Dave McGowan in the early 2000s, big influence on me.
Well, I have a tie-in with Dave McGowan because he said that in Weird Scenes, his book, that the Van Cortlandt is Crosby. David Crosby is a Van Cortlandt. Yeah. So.
And I talk about that in my video on Frankie's Castle, which was a ritual site in Van Cortlandt where the 22 Disciples of Hell used to practice which used to do their rituals. But yeah, the group on Facebook, it's very interesting because we can get into a whole discussion of that, but I had no knowledge of even this group existing. But once the comment section started blowing up, I became very quick friends with Jess D, who was working with Carl. I became very good friends with Carl as well, and went out on a walk and talk with him. And a gentleman by the name of John Mitchell, who wrote a book called Before Son of Sam, which is an interesting little ebook. And the three of us became very quick friends and really, really good investigative partners as well. And they started hipping me to a lot of information that I had no idea existed.
And to let the listener know that there was always a research group around Maury Terry as well. So they mentioned that in the Zeman documentary, I think, but they talk about that. And so this is kind of like you have networked into that pre-existing group that was there. And it's pretty fascinating. And I highly recommend the listeners go to your YouTube channel, Manny Grossman, and check out the 1 hour walk with Denaro, because he just lays out tons of information. You guys walked to the site where we shot. Sorry. So we
walked his shooting scenes, and all of this grew organically. Like you said, I had no idea that they even existed, but unbeknownst to me, there was actually a lot of drama behind the scenes with Maury Terry's group. For one, when he was alive, William, apparently he was like a wordsmith. He liked to put clues in riddles, and he made his team like he kind of like compartmentalized everything and gave only a little information to this person and a little information to that person, and no one could quite come together to make connections, weirdly enough. Maury Terry just had some weird quirk of his personality where he felt like he owned the case and he wasn't going to let anyone else do any of the work. And I think, I hate to say it, but it took Maury Terry's passing for his investigative team to start, and many years after his passing, for them to start feeling comfortable to start sharing this. And I just happened to come by at this opportune time. Completely accidental. I mean, tell people that I feel that there's a zeitgeist right now happening in the universe vis-a-vis Son of Sam, and I also feel in a weird way like I'm being used to solve this case. I know it sounds very strange and mystical, but just experiences in my life have led me to believe that, and so these guys took me under their wing.
Well, you're just to interrupt, but you're kind of at the right time, because I kind of perceive Maury Terry as an old school investigative reporter gumshoe with not a lot of technical skill. I don't think he could do what you did. And I think that you're right. There was a lot of stuff that it wasn't shared with the public, which I think you
we're starting
definitely
to
expose in your YouTube show. Video,
yeah,
sorry.
and no problem. And it came in dribs and drabs, but now we are starting to get some seriously hardcore inside information literally from Maury Terry's own words, emails that he sent to people that were never aired publicly. In fact, one of his emails to Carl Denaro is the basis for my last video, where I am starting to expose this shadowy group called Catholics for Latin America, and I'm alleging that they were one of the groups behind what was happening in this Lake Avenue business district of Yonkers with regards to these satanic rituals and things like that. But yeah, what I feel like I wanted to do mainly in this video series, William, was sort of, if you think of Maury Terry's book as like a coloring book, it wasn't colored in, right? Even as a reader of it and somebody who lived literally a mile away from where all this happened, I felt like I wasn't getting a good picture of like the scenes from his book, the places. So I felt like there was a great opportunity for these walk and talks, show people the places and also tell them the story. But it's become so much more now, because now we're getting into really obscure stuff about the Son of Sam case, which it's actually causing a rift in the Son of Sam world. Weirdly enough, some quarters are getting very angry at me for concentrating only on Yonkers and sort of ignoring the wider, the California, the process stuff.
Right. Or North Dakota, right?
I'm definitely not discounting North Dakota, mainly because John Wheaty's car, the Son of Sam car, was killed in Minot, and also you can't ignore North Dakota. There's just too much evidence that there was satanic activity happening out there.
Those scenes from Sons of Sam were incredible.
They were incredible.
Two cops. He says, "Yeah, I saw like my car, one of the Carr brothers, licking blood, John Carr, from a dead dog." I mean, it's off the charts.
Yeah, I mean, the stories about John Wheaty's car are really off the charts, as you say. But yeah, and we spoke to Glenn Gietzen, one of the detectives on that case. We spoke to him a couple weeks ago. We decided not to make a show with him, mainly because he was a little boring. Let's just put it that way. And we felt like he had said what he needed to say in Josh Zeman's documentary. But yeah, big props to Josh Zeman, because his and him and I are friendly. He contacted me after, I don't know, my 5th or 6th video came out. I guess there was a buzz out there happening that I was completely unaware of, honestly.
Oh, there definitely is, because I actually got one yesterday. You got to see this guy Manny Grossman, Manny Grossman's video. I said, I'm already on it, but I had other people telling me this is incredible.
Thanks.
And I got to give you credit too, because from reading the book, I think it just gives credence to what you just said. You don't see the stuff. You see these pictures that are separate, but you don't see it all together. When you're walking down that aqueduct, that trail, you're seeing all the Carr family. David Berkowitz is in this apartment. He could chuck a rock and hit the Carr family. You can see Wicker Street,
right? And you also get it. Right, and you also get a feel for the actual route that these cultists took when walking to Untermeyer Park. You can see, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we're showing, again, back to the whole coloring book, like coloring in the ultimate evil. We're getting into stories that Maury Terry gave like a sentence to, or a paragraph to. We're filling in those blanks like crazy, because again, we're getting all this information now that we had no clue existed. And honestly, it's making me a little bit disappointed, because I was a big fan of Maury Terry, and I still am. But before this whole video series came out, I wouldn't say I worship the guy, because I don't really worship, human beings, but I have had, and of course I still have, a lot of respect for him. But what I realize now about Maury Terry, William, is that he was a massive gatekeeper. It turned out that he gave 200 pages to California and the process, and Manson and Long Island and Bernard Ligeros and all this stuff, when, in my opinion, the really interesting stuff was happening on a 5-block radius in Yonkers, New York. And one of the things that I think people don't remember in all of the noise about Son of Sam was that this story took place in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Yonkers. So there's a massive story still undiscovered. And Maury Terry knew a lot about this stuff. I talk about that in my Karen Wallstrom video. He was hearing about John Wheaty's car practicing witchcraft in 1960. All right. He was hearing about girls from Sacred Heart Academy. Sacred Heart High School, which is right around the corner from Gorton High School in the Lake Avenue Business District. He was hearing about them practicing witchcraft in Untermeyer Park in 1961. So for him to leave these stories out, to me, was almost an unforgivable offense.
Right,
However,
but you even said in your video that he knew them, that he was in their social kind of clique or something like that. He had to have known that, but he never portrayed that. My memory may have failed me, but I don't recall that in the book at all.
In fact, in the book, he actively covers it up. He talks about how he completely forgot about John Carr, and then he was somehow reminded of him, like a friend. Hey, you went to school with John Carr, don't you remember? Oh yeah, I remember. He kind of acted like a class clown in homeroom, and then that was the extent of it. But meanwhile, we have a story written by Maury Terry himself in the Facebook group. So only the people in the Facebook group knew about this, but it was called Death of a Teacher, and it was the story of Karen Wallstrom the night of her alleged murder. And it goes into all this detail about how Maury Terry knew how John Carr was hanging out with known sexual molesters and predators and sodomizers, particularly an individual who goes by the moniker Scout. Now we know who Scout is. We know his name. He's still alive. We know who he was, and we know where he is now. Scout was a major rapist of young kids in that Lake Avenue business district of Yonkers, and he was hanging out with John Carr as early as 1961. He was a little older, and Maury Terry was hearing about them going to practice witchcraft. So for Maury Terry to pretend that he didn't know John Carr very well, to me, that opened up a whole new insight into the man and also the book. And I vowed in my video series that we're going to find out what he didn't tell us, and we're going to color those in again.
But do you think that it might have been like a self-preservation thing, not to mention him, because that there were other members, 22 members of the Sons of Sam out? I mean, maybe there's a reasonable explanation for not talking about it. Maybe that was something he wanted to keep secret. I don't know. I'm not coming to his defense, but
no, you can absolutely, totally. As I sort of been thinking about this in my mind, remember, he was doing this in real time. I mean, it wasn't 2021 when he was doing this. It was 1978, 1980, 1981. These people were young men. They were still alive, these members of the 22 Disciples of Hell. And they were local to Yonkers. They were still living there. So definitely there was a self-preservation involved. There was also the issue of not wanting to get sued. But then you could allow your mind, if you're conspiratorial enough, and I can go there. I'm not saying I believe what I'm about to say, but I could definitely have the argument with someone and discuss this. Was Maury Terry actually just a limited hangout? Was he, and Jason Goodman brought this up to me the other day, and it blew my mind. Was Maury Terry actively covering up for another reason? And of course, I'm not prepared to go down that road yet. I still believe that Maury Terry was on the side of good in all this. But
well, it is convenient that didn't he publish his book after the two Carr brothers were dead? So like,
well, he publicly, but he didn't. Yeah, he published it several years after. But I don't know if there's any real.
The murders were 75. He published
76 and 77.
76, 77. Sorry, and then the book was published 86.
I believe the first printing was 86 or 87. And I mean, so there could be a million reasons. Maybe he didn't want to get sued, but I don't know. I think one could make a reasonable argument that it was mainly he didn't want to get his head blown off. Remember, he was discussing what a lot of people seem to forget when we're talking about Son of Sam, is we're talking about homicidal maniacs who thought nothing of blowing people's heads off. So we're not talking about innocent school teachers here, although there are some school teachers involved for sure.
I mean, that's what I think your video series gets in, is this background that it's a much larger group that surfaced in 76, 77. This whole thing was going on
really for a while. Well, that's the thing, William. I went where the evidence was showing me. I had no real agenda going into this other than to tell the story that Maury told, and that was it. But once I started getting information about the Lake Avenue area of Yonkers, the Boy Scout troops, the known predators and molesters who were grooming young boys in that neighborhood, and then learning about doctors who were performing really funky experiments on people, and then learning about Catholics for Latin America that was importing untraceable children into that neighborhood, and then a doctor who was the head of that, who was brother-in-laws with the Carr family, and they found 2 dead kids across the street from his house. I mean, to me, Yonkers got very interesting at that point, and I decided just for my own sanity's sake, I was going to concentrate on Yonkers because it was something that I could actually do, rather than worry about Charles Manson and the process and Aleister Crowley and all that kind of stuff.
So how did your progress? You did that first walkthrough video, which is fascinating because you're walking by Untermeyer, you walk to the Carr residence, you see Berkowitz's apartment building, and you're starting to get people to just send you information. So a lot of the people in these groups are sending info, and then how is it progressing from there?
Well, it was very organic and very, very cool. So what happened was, in that first video, now it's hard for a lot of people to sit through an hour, but if you do sit through an hour, I actually give in that video quite a lot of gold nuggets in there. I bring you down to an area called Ravine Avenue, which is where I was told in the year 2002 by a gentleman who has to remain nameless, but he told me that his aunt and uncle owned the yellow Volkswagen, the famous yellow Volkswagen that everyone knew about in the Son of Sam investigation. I bring you down there. Then I also tell the story that I briefly mentioned earlier in this interview about a man that I met who I'm convinced was a shooter. He was from Yonkers. He was the right age. He knew, he called John Carr Wheaties. He didn't even call him John. He called him Wheaties. He knew Berkey's nickname, David Berkowitz's nickname, Berkey. He said, I hung out with these guys. And then he started really acting weird. He started talking about Stacy Moskowitz all the time and making shooting noises. Anyway, long story short, Jess D, the super sleuth, a member of Carl Denaro's team, she wrote a comment saying, I know who you're talking about. Okay. Now, I was very careful not to give names, so I was a little bit worried. Who's this person who knows who I'm talking about? So her and I did some private email exchanges, and she convinced me to give up the name. Okay. Once I gave her the names of these people, she then did her super sleuthing, and in literally 10 minutes came back with about 20 different articles from the Yonkers newspapers, basically saying, Manny, you could be right. Whoa, look at these people who they're associated with. This guy who you're telling me about, he grew up in Mulford Gardens, which a lot of Son of Sam people came out of Mulford Gardens. It was like a public housing project in Yonkers. This guy might have known this person. Oh man, the owners of the yellow Volkswagen. Holy cow. They connect with all these people. So within the span of like 2 hours, me and Jess D became like best friends. And we started really working together really well. And then it just blew up from there. They started giving me all this information from the Facebook group. Carl Denaro started getting involved and giving me information. And so now what went from just me retelling the story of the ultimate evil with throwing in a few little things, this video series has become an avenue of original research now, essentially picking up from not only from where Maury Terry left off, but also resurrecting the actual work that he was doing, and bringing it to light, because he kept it hidden for so long. Again, who knows why, but I call Maury Terry the ultimate gatekeeper.
Right. And for people who don't know, Carl Denaro just put out a book, The Son of Sam and Me, The Truth About Why I Wasn't Shot by David Berkowitz. So that's also recent. So there's all this stuff surfacing. It's pretty incredible how it kind of came around at this time. But yeah, you have in your videos some of those old articles that you found about these characters, the Carr father and all these people, and some of the sons were very clever. Like you said, one of the sons, I can't remember which one, of a very talented, Michael was a good writer, talking about world government at a very young age. So
yeah, that's the video. Your audience, I'm pretty sure that they can see my page up here. If you look, the 4th video from the top row, it's called Deep Inside the Carr Family. Correct, that one right there. This is where we talk about that. This came about because I was just given the marriage certificate of Francis and Sam, the father and mother of John and Michael. And I was also given a letter that Sam Carr had written to the Yonkers Herald Statesman in the early 60s, talking about how we need to beat kids up. We need to hit their bottoms with rubber hoses. We need to hit their knuckles with rulers.
Super abusive, yeah.
Yeah. And then it dawned on me, wait, this was a family that raised two homicidal maniacs. Let me look a little deeper into them. And we found out some really amazing stuff. We're alleging, we don't have proof yet, but we're alleging that there might have been an intelligence operation running out of the Carr household. Frances Carr, the mother of the family, was a corporal in the Marines in 1945, stationed out of Henderson Hall in Virginia, which I've been told is a place where intelligence operatives were stationed. We're still parsing that out, but then
it is remarkable. It wouldn't be the first time an occultist was in an intelligence officer.
Correct. I mean, yeah, you hear about all this. I mean, Michael Aquino, all these guys.
Crowley, all these guys, yeah.
Right, exactly. So then we started looking more into the Carr family, and yeah, we realized that both Sam Carr and his son Michael Vale Baron Decharnowski Carr, I use his entire name. I just enjoy using his entire name. I call them little letter writers. They loved writing letters to the newspaper. They loved writing missives about how complaining about this person and what the city should do to improve this here. And then Michael Decharnowski Carr writes this letter about world government and how we need to have the UN, right? And it's like, and then we found out, this was not in the video, I found this out afterwards. This might blow some of your viewers' minds. Michael Vale Baron Decharnowski Carr, brother of John Wheaties Carr, suspect in Son of Sam shooting at the Eliphas Disco, and of course one of the sons of Sam Carr. He went to Rhodes Prep Academy, RHODES, named after who? Cecil Rhodes,
right?
With his 200-year plan to there's the letter.
Yeah, see, here's the letter.
And if you want to pause that, your audience can read that. So Cecil Rhodes, of course, with his 200-year plan to destroy the Five Eyes countries, which we're probably right in the midst of right now, right? So now, being an open-minded person, right, who is going where the evidence and where all this is leading, I'm now saying, was Son of Sam an intelligence operation? And the answer is, I don't know. This is blowing my mind just like it's blowing the audience's mind. And I think that's one of the reasons why people like this, is because we're going through this together. Right.
It's like a crowdsourced investigation, correct, which people can follow on your thing. But it's also like, I think you acknowledge that you don't think that Berkowitz wrote that first letter. It was
Hell no. It's not a matter of don't think. I'm positive of it. I'm convinced Michael Carr wrote the second letter. I don't know who wrote the first letter, but neither of them were in Berkowitz's handwriting, and neither of them were in when you write, you have a style, just like you have a handwriting that's unique to yourself. Just like, John Bonham, when he played the drums, it sounded like John Bonham, right? Like Neil Peart plays the drums, it sounds like Neil Peart. You can't change who you are. So if you read Berkowitz's letters and if you look at his handwriting, it's night and day from the Son of Sam letters.
And those Son of Sam letters, they have a dark poeticism to them. Somebody correct, intelligent wrote those, full of inside little jabs and jokes, like very mocking.
Correct.
And that was the whole thing about the investigation, is they ignored all that stuff. Wicked King Wicker, Wheaties, raper of women and children. How did somebody who's a raper of women and children? Where's that investigation?
Exactly. Thank you.
It doesn't comport, or it conflicts with what happened with the whole Berkowitz arrest, etc. Like, where's all this other information?
And what's even crazier, William, is that if you read The Ultimate Evil, Maury Terry found this out about John Wheaties Carr the day of Berkowitz's arrest, just by looking in a Yonkers phone book. It said John Wheat Carr. And then he made a couple calls, and he found out that John Carr's nickname was Wheaties, and he's like, why is John Carr's name in a Son of Sam letter? So if like an average, he worked for IBM at the time, Maury, and so if an IBM worker, who knew how to write can somehow figure this out, what was up with the cops? How come they didn't do their job? Well, I did a interview with Detective Hank Sanati. You can see it 3 videos down from below this letter. Now,
There it is. Yeah.
correct. Now, before you get, I guess you could just play it because you can't
Tony,
hear.
pause it.
Uh,
You're right there with him, right?
correct.
This is his place.
Pause it for a second because one of the reasons, and sorry for speaking so much.
No, please do. Go.
One of the things that I wanted to do with this video series that I felt was extremely important for the audience was not only giving stories about what I call the nameless and faceless in the Ultimate Evil. I do that with Karen Wallstrom. Now I'm trying. In my latest video, we tell the story about 2 dead kids that they dug up from a lot in Yonkers. But also, what I wanted to do was bring to life some of the investigators and the characters in the Ultimate Evil. And one of the person that I always felt was never given any attention whatsoever was Detective Henry Sanati. He worked with Maury Terry particularly on the North Dakota investigation. The 2 of them came together. I'm not quite sure what year it was when they came together. I think the late 80s, mid 80s. But Detective Sanati has never been interviewed before except for a 10-second snippet on some show in 1993. And so we just cold called him, guys. I mean, everybody's like, how'd you find this dude? Well, I don't want to say where he lives, but it was very easy to find his phone number. And we literally just called him, like picked up a landline and called him, and he picked up and we spoke to him, and we said, would you care to be interviewed? And he said, yeah, I'd love it. And so I went to his apartment, which you can see here, which I thought was really, really interesting for the crowd because in the book he's portrayed as an extremely religious New York PD police department detective. And if you look at this right here adds so much depth.
Right.
Yeah, if you look at all these things in the background, I mean, it's just amazing for me, the sociologist and looking at this as almost like an anthropologist.
Yeah,
to me,
I would say hyper Catholic iconography. Yeah.
To me, this adds so much richness and depth to the whole story that I figured that people would love it too. And I would say that 99.999% of the people do. There is a hardcore group of people who are very angry at what I'm doing for some reason, and they have a lot of very nasty personal things to say, which for those of you who are doing that, just know I find that very funny. I actually read that for entertainment. So if you think you're bothering me with that, you clearly don't know who you're dealing with. But Sanati's interview was interesting, getting back to the whole John Carr, Wheat Carr. He was getting intelligence, William, coming to him in mid-1977 at the height of the Son of Sam case, before he met Maury Terry or even had any clue that Maury Terry existed. He was getting intelligence coming to him that Wheat and her 2 brothers were involved, but he mentioned Wheat Carr first. Now, this blew my mind because you never hear of Wheat Carr being involved in the Son of Sam. Now, I'm not saying she is, and I will give the caveat that Detective Sanati is pushing 80 years old. There could be things going on with his memory, okay? We might have reached him 5 years too late. However, he was very adamant about saying that he was given intelligence that he said Wheat and her brothers. So it's pretty hard. Yeah,
but she was in the Zeman documentary. I remember her being in there. They mention her name. They don't mention her as a participant.
Exactly. So this is something that blew my mind, and now I want to know, like, what was Wheat's role, if any, in this whole thing. So, it's like every time you ask a question, you get a million more questions that you have. But to me, that's really the fun of all of this, William.
There's a lot of information to mine. I mean, I don't know. There's so many untrammeled pathways. There's like, who are the 22? Are there really 22 Sons of Sam?
Well,
what other crimes have they done? I mean, they probably engage in all kinds of criminality. Are they trafficking kids? It reminded me, I did an interview about the woman who did the Oakland child killing case where there were like 5 kids and they never found the perpetrator, but they found the people around them, and they were wealthy, well-to-do people involved in child trafficking, going up into some island up in the north of Michigan and all kinds of creepy stuff. And it reminded me of that kind of, and it was right around this era. I think it was in the 70s. There were allegations of child porn. So it's almost like this same kind of underground environment was there. And that's what the Son of Sam killing sprung out of that. That's what I get the sense.
The question that I have is, like, how did this established group that was around for decades of people in the North Yonkers Lake Avenue Business District area who were involved with child pedophilia, who were involved in late night rituals in Untermeyer Park, and all this really nefarious and disgusting activity, how did that end up as the Son of Sam shootings in the 70s? And that's what we're still trying to parse out. But my latest video on the CFLA, Catholics for Latin America, William, talks about this exact thing. We are alleging that this group, Catholics for Latin America, headed by a very prominent doctor in Yonkers who was related to the Carr family, okay? We are alleging that they were trafficking kids. Their ostensible mission was to go down to the poorest parts of Latin America and bring children back for a, quote, better life. They also had a mission to train missionaries up here in Yonkers and send them down to Latin America. Now, we all know that the CIA has dummy corporations, shell groups that they used, especially in those years in the 50s and 60s. So we are seeing the same things happening in Yonkers. Very prominent elite people in those neighborhoods potentially involved with serious crimes against children. And if you want kids for rituals, late night rituals that you want to sacrifice, well, you're not going to take them from, Johnny next door, right? You're not going to take it from your next door neighbor's house. Having a conduit, a pipeline of untraceable kids from Latin America would be ideal. And then I came across an article written in, it was an interview, interviewing a survivor of satanic practices and rituals in New York. And he said that the only kids that he saw that were killed in these rituals late at night. Now, he wasn't talking about Yonkers, but he was talking about the general milieu. They were Latin American kids. He called them Mexican kids. So, like,
that ties right into Keith Raniere, NXIVM, Jeffrey Epstein.
Correct.
There's all kinds of kids coming from the South, coming from Mexico.
Comes from Mexico, right? I mean, this could be something that they do now because it's just the established MO going back to the 1940s and 50s.
And you had a story of somebody who witnessed one of this group's rituals of killing some kid, right? Then you have somebody who said at a testimony. Can you talk a little bit about that, just to kind of verify or validate your story?
Correct. This was in a book by a graffiti artist who goes by the moniker Fuzz One. Now, Fuzz One is kind of a problematic character. He is not the most truthful person in the world, and I didn't necessarily believe the story that he wrote about in his book, which I'll tell your audience. But the reason why I do believe it is because it meshes exactly with a description of a satanic ritual in Untermeyer Park that Brother John, for those familiar with The Ultimate Evil, Brother John's a very famous character. He was an early member of the 22 Disciples of Hell. The story that I'm about to relate from Fuzz One's book was an exact match with Brother John, and those two didn't know each other. So I do put a lot of credence into the story from Fuzz One's book, and the story is essentially, in a nutshell, Fuzz One met a child prostitute in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. Now, Van Cortlandt Park is another area where these cultists did their most nefarious ritualistic activity, murdering children in the middle of the night. He was a child prostitute. He picked up his Johns in Van Cortlandt Park. He was picked up one night. He was asked, "Hey, do you want to go see a party?" He said, "Sure, as long as you're giving me money, I'll go anywhere with you. No problem." The guy gave him $20. They went to this, what's called Frankie's Castle, which I show in my video series. And they drugged this kid ice. And he was just aware enough to see what was happening around him, but not able to really fight back. And he basically describes a young kid of about 9-10 years old on an altar in this place called Frankie's Castle. There were 6 men, he called them men, not boys, men, who were all around him chanting, walking around him naked. Then this is going to get distasteful, but this is the subject that we delve into in true crime. The men all disrobed. They were wearing robes. They were naked underneath. They disrobed. Two women came out and slashed up these chickens and poured blood all over the men. Then the men started peeing all over the young boy. And then they proceeded to rape the young boy, both orally and anally. And then they killed the kid as well, as a sacrifice, I guess, to Satan or whatever the hell they were doing. And it was a very believable story in this book by Fuzz One called Last of the Old School. And the only reason why I bring it up again is because it's the exact same story that Brother John talked about his initiation into the cult in Untermeyer Park in the early 60s. Now, Fuzz One's story took place in 1974-75. Brother John's story takes place in Untermeyer Park in 1960-61, but it was the same thing. Kids, blood poured all over them, peed on, anally raped, all this crazy stuff that was happening in the middle of the woods of Untermeyer Park. And then, this whole crowdsourcing thing happens. Then I'm getting stories from people. I have a lady who called me from California, but she grew up in the relevant time period in the relevant neighborhood of Yonkers. And she said that in the early 1950s, she was brought to Untermeyer Park with by a man who was into child pornography, and he showed her child pornography in Untermeyer Park, and then he started talking about being a druid and essentially just scared the crap out of her. And this was in 1951 in Untermeyer Park. So
it goes all the way back. Untermeyer was a very interesting character.
Yeah.
And that park is super occultic. And even if you look at the main doors where you walk in, it's the sign of a cross. And you open it and the cross breaks up, and then you walk in, and straight ahead of you are two towers with a sphinx on there.
Correct.
Which ties directly back to Alfred Louis Constant, a.k.a. Eliphas Levi, who said that the sign of the sphinx is to know, to will, to dare, and remain silent. And you see that same theme all through in Masonry, the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And it's so strange that killing came out of Eliphas, which people say, oh, it sounds like an elephant. That's the first name of Eliphas Levi's fake name.
Correct.
And you still, that first letter has his evocation of Black Pact symbol with a little bit of a variation on it, but I've heard researchers pass over that. But that element of Eliphas Levi is all there. I mean, it's incredible. And Eliphas Levi mentions in his book, he mentions, what is his name? The guy who was the child killer, too, of France. So he mentions it in one of his books. It's,
there you go.
Yeah. So there's gonna be stuff. Untermeyer, I'm trying to figure out if Crowley was in New York City back from 1914 to 1918 or 1917. And I'm trying to make that connection between Crowley and Untermeyer, because Untermeyer was a big time, big wig, heavy duty lawyer.
Yeah, it would be an interesting thing to connect if you could. I know I just finished a book on Untermeyer, actually, and yeah, he was like a heavy power player in New York. A lot of people think he was from Germany. He wasn't. He was from Virginia. He was born to German parents, and he did love Germany, and he fought supposedly against Nazism, but he was American all the way. But he was involved with Warburg. He was involved with all of Boyce Thompson,
Standard Oil.
He was part of the whole Federal Reserve system, the beginning of that, which makes him evil in my book right off the bat. But interestingly enough, he could not give that property away, Untermeyer Park. He tried to give it to his kids. None of his children wanted it. In fact, they wanted to be as far away from it as possible. They even said that the place had just an evil feel to it. He basically foisted it off on Yonkers in his will, and Yonkers didn't even want it.
Right, they only took part of his land, right? They only took a certain part.
16 acres.
Right, and kept it. And then you said, right, in one of your walks, maybe it was the first one, they said that one, the Cave of Hell or whatever it was, got blown up. Devil's Cave is no longer in existence, correct?
Correct. They blew it up in 1984, I believe, when the hospital just north of Untermeyer Park, it actually shares the same contiguous landscape. There's no street that that intersects. It's called St. John's Hospital. They apparently expanded in the 80s, and they took some more of the parkland, and that's where the Devil's Cave was. That's where that Maury Terry has that pictured in his book. But
I think there's pictures of him in there too.
There too, yeah. And believe me, I was looking for that place like crazy. See, back before the internet days, we didn't know these things. Like, oh yeah, they blew it up in 1984, and oh yeah, it was hard to find these things. So I remember in the late 90s going to find Devil's Cave and getting very frustrated. And it was only until I met someone a year or two later, he said, "Oh no, they blew that up." Interestingly enough, the guy who told me was also the guy who told me that his aunt and uncle owned the famous yellow Volkswagen. So,
which was supposedly traded around much like the guns too, like you said.
Correct.
In fact, nobody really owned that gun. They just, here, Joe, here, Bob, here, have this.
Correct. There was a huge gun running element to the Son of Sam. There was one guy who I already named. Maury calls him Gorman Johnson in the Ultimate Evil, but we actually identify the guy as Norman Silberstein. I know it doesn't sound like a name that you would associate with the Son of Sam, but Norman Silberstein was a hard-nosed criminal. And he was a gun runner, and he also was a very, very adept getaway driver. And so he was one of the getaway drivers at the Loria shooting, which was the first one. And he was also involved with bringing guns into the group. But interestingly enough, the couple that I was told owned the yellow Volkswagen, and we know their names, and my investigation team knows their names, and we verified that these people actually existed and that they were very close to some of the players involved in Son of Sam. The man in that couple I was told was a gun runner as well, and he was actually, we found an arrest. See, God bless the Yonkers Herald Tribune and newspapers in those days, because anything we need to find about any of these people is in the newspaper. They really did. Amazing. Yeah. So we found this gentleman. He got arrested for running drugs. Again, going back to what I'm talking about, the owner of the yellow Volkswagen, potential owner of the yellow Volkswagen, he was arrested for running guns. Interestingly enough, the guy who arrested him was Wheat Carr's husband, wow. John McCabe, another guy whose name comes up in the Ultimate Evil.
Wasn't there a connection with the Sisman and Platzman murders to the Son of Sam? Did you ever research or look into that at all?
I have not. That's one thing where I'm still going by Maury Terry's research and taking him at his word, that what he told is the truth. For the benefit of the audience, Sisman and Platzman were two people who were killed on Halloween night, I believe in 1981, down in Greenwich Village. And the story is that they were killed because Sisman was the guy who took a snuff film. He filmed the killing of Stacy Moskowitz, and that he was threatening to go public with it. So they killed him for that. I am going to do a walk and talk on Sisman and Platzman, and I hope to find out more.
I would definitely be interested in doing that. I mean, there's probably other deaths and things like that that just have not been, connected to this whole cult. I mean,
totally.
You said there's 2 deaths. Nobody's found the women that supposedly were buried by this guy who was the suffocator of women. So there's a lot more information. And this research is incredible, guys. You got to go check it out. Manny Grossman on YouTube. And I'd love to have you back in the future. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything you'd like to add before we kind of wrap up? Anything I missed or what?
No,
I
just want to say thank you to yourself, William, and thank you to your great audience. Really appreciate you guys watching the videos. We're having an awesome time making them. And of course, the whole thought behind this is just to bring you the most cutting edge and newest information on Son of Sam. What I have upcoming is this weekend, I'm going to be going out with Carl Denaro again for another walk and talk. And we're going to be filming the sites of the very famous third shooting in the Son of Sam incident. And this one was called the Lomino DeMasi shooting. 2 women, one's last name was Lomino and one's last name was DeMasi. This is the one where John Wheaty's car is the main suspect. But we're also going to get into Robert Mapplethorpe in this video as well. So your audience might, the sick Robert Mapplethorpe. So your audience might be interested in that. And that should be out by Monday. But I'm trying to stick to 1 video a week, although I'm starting to become such a perfectionist with this and so OCD that I don't know if I can hang on to that schedule much longer. It might be one every 2 weeks because I just want them to be really good.
Well, they are excellent. I highly
Thank you.
recommend people check this out. It's Manny Grossman on YouTube. And where can people, if they want to contact you, email or you on social media?
Sure. Well, I do have a Twitter. It's just Grossman Manny at Twitter, and I also have a website. Now, I was at one point a gardener and a garden educator. I kind of forgot about that aspect of my life, but I still make my living landscaping and doing gardening here in New York City. So my website, which is mannygrossman.com, has nothing about it on Son of Sam. It's just all about my landscaping and gardening. I teach private gardening classes online as well. And that's where you can find all my contact information, mannygrossman.com.
mannygrossman.com again. Okay. Manny Grossman, YouTube. People check it out. This is really incredible research. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
I'll schedule you in the future. I just have
Definitely.
to. All right, man. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.